What do 12 years of trying and failing to become a solo, full-time indie game developer look like? Is it fun? Is it painful? Can you succeed? How miserably can you fail? Yes, and by solo I mean working alone, independently, without anyone watching over me as I slave away to try to live off my indie game development income. Well, I tried it. I started making games in 2011 and have worked on dozens of games since then. Some finished, many prototyped, and scores left abandoned, never to be touched again. It is 2024 now, and as I look back on my 20s, I see a life spent chasing my dreams and getting curb stomped too many times to count. Come with me on this journey as I take you through all my successes and failures and share my story about how I went for it and what it brought me in the end. This story has highs, it has lows, and a whole lot of struggle in between. My love for games and my desire to make them began at a young age. I remember drawing out board games inspired by an Indian Game of Life knockoff called Picnic. I took the piece of paper with a crudely drawn path and a bunch of dice and pieces to my friends' homes and played it for hours. My obsession with video games started when I got my first home console around 12, a bootleg NES manufactured by Mitashi that is at the heart of the video gaming experience for anyone who grew up in India in the 90s. While some people here had a good PC at home, and I definitely didn't grow up poor either, I received my first computer, a Pentium 1, in 2005 at age 15. I immediately spent hours playing Age of Empires 1 and its expansion Rise of Rome. I distinctly remember playing just the game demo over and over again, especially the final level. My very first foray into game development, however, wasn't a game. It was a map I made for Counter-Strike 1.6 that reimagined my college building as a war-torn arena. After I graduated from college, I started on a mission to make a real game. This was in 2012, when many game developers were still making money with Flash games. There was a website back then called flashgamelicense.com where you could submit your own games, which would then be judged with an internal rating and would be put in front of sponsors to be bid on. So I figured that I could make Flash games to make some income, as I didn't have a job yet back then. I wasn't fully comfortable with coding, so I picked a tool that made game development a little easier with visual scripting and found Stencil. That was the game engine I used to make my first few games. I made a puzzle game, an Angry Birds clone, and a helicopter clone. I also added monetization to those games with ads. That is, in fact, how I made my very first dollar on the internet. And just like that, I was hooked. It was the first indicator that maybe, possibly, I could make a living doing what I love. More than just game development being an interesting avenue to make money, it was also the time I started thinking about being an entrepreneur. My dream then was to start a game studio and do this full time. A few months later, I started my first job. As a software developer working in Java, I learned a lot about coding large projects. I saw why visual scripting was not enough to work on a real project and then switched to Unity. I remember having to pick between Unity script and JavaScript, as C# wasn't even an option back then. In August 2014, I moved to the US to get a master's degree. I ended up enrolling in the University of Utah's Entertainment Arts and Engineering program. It was there that my mind was blown by the possibilities of what games can be, more than just an entertainment medium, but of artistic expression. I made several games as a part of the course, and they ended up being some of my most critical learning experiences. I also made several games and prototypes on my own, including one of my riskiest games to date that would later get a Steam release years down the road. While my immediate concern after the course was to get a job, I still had the indie game developer dream at the back of my mind. I found one soon after graduating, right there at the University of Utah in a research position. 2 years later, when the funding for my project at the university ran out, I was on my way to India again, this time determined to make my dream of full-time game development a reality. I was unemployed starting May 1, 2018. I opted to not start a job immediately as I wanted to keep the indie dream alive. Instead, I started doing freelance work around the internet, as it was something that I could do quickly and make just enough to make my student loan payments while still having enough time to work on my projects. I started working on my first game on 1st September 2018. I say this because I remember that day when I was at a relative's house and had the idea. I adopted a strategy to make shorter games and publish more of them every year, instead of working on a sizable game for a year or two and possibly having it fail. I also knew that I needed a strong hook that hits instantly and convinces players to download the game. The concept I settled on tackling for that first game was permadeath, and what better grisly aesthetic to pair that core concept with than the game that is infamous for its brutality. So was born Russian Roulette One Life. I released the game in December 2018 and it was an instant success. I still get messages from people to this day on my Discord asking me how to play that game now that it has been taken off Steam. At its peak, before it was removed, it had over 150,000 downloads and over 1,000 reviews. I got a lot of great comments from people and some bad ones, but it really scratched an itch that I had for a long time of people playing something I made and appreciating it. The game got a lot of attention, being covered by one of my favorite YouTubers, Stephanie Sterling. Though the game was a hit, it was a financial disappointment. It had a lot of downloads, but I seriously overestimated how many of those would convert to a purchase of the DLC. It was a learning lesson. Regardless, I knew I had a great start on Steam and couldn't wait to make more games. However, here is how I messed it all up. This was when I was looking to do something with machine learning for my next game. I settled for gamifying text inputs, and the result was Manifesto: The Devil Inside Me, which was all text and sound with a simple mobile phone UI, but played by the perspective of a mass shooter. I submitted it to Steam, and it was in the review process for a long time, during which I started working on another game and submitted it too. Finally, one day, I received an email from Steam saying that they had decided to not launch Manifesto, and they were also not interested in doing business with me anymore. I was permanently banned from Steam and my games were taken off it. It was devastating. I finally learned how far I had strayed from the person I was, and I feel ashamed that I made a game that was so wild in its design. As an Indian, where mass shootings don't occur, it is not my place to judge how someone from the US might feel about what I had created, where it is a constant occurrence and brings with it fear, terror, and stigma. I don't disagree with Steam's decision, and it was instead a wake-up moment for me and for where I wanted to take my games. For many months later, I worked on several freelance jobs and slowly paid off my student debt. I was ready to get back into games again. However, I also wanted the reach and exposure that Steam can give me. So I just decided to bend the rules and release games on that platform anyway, but with a different name. I have made several games. Let me talk about a few of them now. Atrophy, made during my time at the University of Utah, is my most personal game. It tells an all too familiar story of love and loss that most will experience in their life growing up. I was really intrigued with the concept of mechanics as metaphor at the time, and the game reflects that, with the mechanics doing the bulk of the storytelling while also being accompanied by a poem that gave it context. The experiment works just as well without the poem, and some might say that it works better without it. Frame of Reference is a puzzle platformer based on the innovative forced perspective mechanic first popularized by game developer Albert Shih in his tech demo Museum of Simulation Technology. I took recreating the mechanic as a coding challenge and was able to get it working. While working on the game, I listened to game design lectures from Jonathan Blow and embraced his philosophy of letting the game mechanics reveal new things about themselves to create challenges. I am pretty proud of how the game turned out and still remains the best showcase of my game design skills. All That You Leave Behind is my attempt at writing a visual novel. The only interaction that you have in the entire game is to go to the next piece of dialogue. There are no choices to make, just as someone close to death doesn't have many options left. Many of these games were first uploaded to Steam under a different name. Then I felt overconfident and changed the developer name to mine, and lo and behold, after a few months, all my games were taken down again. This time without even an email to let me know that it had happened. I dropped my dream of game development again and went back to freelancing. A year or so later, I really wanted to get into game dev again and work on an idea that had captivated me for a while. My use of text-based machine learning in Manifesto was not the only way I had imagined using the technology in games. I really liked the concept that a trained model is kind of like a representation of all the data that it has been trained on. If the data is created by a player, then the trained model becomes an abstract representation of the player's playstyle. So was born Summer Friends Don't Stick Around, a game that explores digital death and what passing on your legacy through your playstyle might mean. In conclusion, I never did achieve my dream of living off my indie game earnings. They were minuscule compared to the time and effort that went into them. However, I'm very proud of what I've done over the last 12 years and wouldn't have it any other way. I urge you to check out these games for yourself if you have the time. They hardly take a few minutes to go through. While light on gameplay, I hope they invoke that one feeling that I wanted to convey through them. For now, I'm not sure what the future has in store for me. Honestly, I've been burned out by the indie game dream because it has taken so much from me over the last decade. I learned a lot of new skills along the way, but as I'm approaching my mid-30s, I have very little to show for it. I am, however, not ungrateful for what I have achieved, and I do recognize that very few people will have experienced the joy I felt when I got a hit game on Steam, and it will stay with me forever as one of the best moments of my life. Going forward, I will definitely be making games, but they will be small projects based on ideas that really resonate with me. I still have many game ideas in my journal that I want to bring to life. I'm also going to give writing a try, as it has also been one of my interests for a while. I finished my first novella and released it on Amazon last year, and I'm working on a new novel right now. I'll continue to build projects, whether it be games, books, or software, and will make postmortems for them here on this channel as soon as they are available. I cannot promise a consistent schedule as I'm very busy with my day job and other responsibilities, but I would be honored if you want to stay updated on my work. I, someday, also want to get back on Steam. Maybe with a large enough following here, I can convince those people up in Seattle to give me another chance. I also want to improve my game design skills. One thing I have lacked in my game so far is compelling gameplay. This criticism has been often lobbied against me several times, and it is more than fair. I was so often obsessed with the shock value, aesthetic, or core ideas of my games that I ignored gameplay. While I will take baby steps to improve, however, I have decided to embrace it. I will improve the gameplay in my games, but I'll never make games that focus solely on exciting game mechanics and game design. They will be short and will focus on getting that core idea across, even if they are very light on gameplay. I have also realized that many games that I have released so far have been very personal to me. They have been selfish in the sense that they tell a part of my story. The concepts are filled with self-pity and narcissism in a way that I have better understood as I have aged. But now that I'm older, I want to explore concepts that deal with a broad range of human experiences. Even if they are not personal to me, I hope to capture a part of the emotional spectrum that I, myself, might not have ever experienced. I was also making games with a commercial appeal to make some money. My motivations were always holding back what ideas I chose to implement or how much its scope should be for a paid product. Now that I'm free from that, I will focus on bringing to life my weirdest concepts and putting them out there as often and as quickly as I can, sharing the process on this YouTube channel. All my games will be free to play and available to download on itch.io. My games, if you could call them that, will not be for everyone. But my promise is that they will be interesting and you will learn something along the way about game design, the game development process, or just the world around you. Also, as a part of this video release, my first video on YouTube, I'm releasing a sanitized version of Manifesto, where the mass shooting aspect has been completely removed. So, subscribe today and I'll hopefully see you again soon with my next release.